These are uncertain times for all professional associations, and the need for leaders to support their members is essential. But it can be difficult to find the time, resources, and suitable avenues of development in this ever-changing landscape. That's why you need to have Impact. Impact is a 12-week leadership development program designed to reflect the unique nature of association governance, providing board leaders with professional development, peer support, and strategic insights into the role and purpose of board leadership, ensuring that you have impact. Register today for our February 2021 cohort at associationtransformation.org. Impact, a signature program delivered in partnership by Brewer Pratt Solutions and Consort Strategy.
Hello, and welcome to another Association Transformation podcast. This week, we are going to undertake a new conversation. We're going to continue advancing the impact and evolution of nonprofit organizations, but a little different turn today. We're excited to explore new ideas and seek diversity of thought as it relates, in this case, to board leadership and board leadership training. But we always have a commitment to mission-driven organizations and have spurred this collaboration between the teams at Brewer Pratt Solutions and Consort Strategies for our transatlantic conversation. I'm Elisa Pratt with Brewer Pratt Solutions, and I'm joined by my partner, Andrew Chamberlain.
Andrew Chamberlain, you told me that I only had to say my name, and then you just went straight in and did it for me. My God, I can't believe that.
I wasn't sure if you'd pick up on the cue, but thankfully we are joined by some special guests. It won't be just Andrew and I bantering today. We're going to take a deep dive into the issues, topics, and challenges and opportunities facing the association community. We've seen a lot, especially as it comes to boards and governance, from mergers and membership, leadership and advocacy. Nothing's off limits today. And any subject that affects nonprofits and their survival is our target. And as I mentioned today, we really want to talk about the urgency of board leadership, the importance of board governance, and the investment that organizations can and should be making in the training and development of their volunteer board members. This morning, we're excited to welcome three guests. We've brought a diversity of staff and volunteer leaders. We thought it was important to have voices on both sides. We're joined by Sean Burnham, Vice President of Operations at Performance Contracting. Sean, in my mind, I've met him as a board member in a couple different organizations. He is the uber volunteer, always a president, a past chair, always a board member in one capacity or another with every organization he is a part of. I'm also excited to invite and welcome Steve Hayes, volunteer president at TOPRA. Very excited to welcome him, and as well as Chris Williams, director of membership at the Association of the Wall and Ceiling Industry. So, Chris, you represent the staff side, and given your diversity of perspective, maybe you can kick it off for us and let us know what have these last 9 months done to your board? Are you now all only online? Are people not sure what their terms look like? Are they unsure of their position? What is a board member? What does it mean these days?
Lisa and Andrew, thanks for having me first and foremost. I appreciate the opportunity. For AWCI, it's interesting. The last 9 months have obviously brought change. It started with our convention last March. And one of the things I think we look at now is moving forward. And one of the biggest questions from a staff perspective is we've gone through 9 months of entirely virtual. Everybody's itching to get back to in-person conventions and meetings. One of the biggest challenges is going to keep our people engaged on every level for the next how many months. We simply don't know what that environment's going to look like going into 2021. We certainly hope we'll have a convention in April, but we have to plan for alternatives. And one of the key things moving forward is going to be how do we keep our folks engaged as they have been these last 9 months, helping to sustain us.
Well, and maybe that's a great chance to ask the board members who are with us at this, on this call. Have your organizations been successful in engaging you? What have they done to help enhance the effectiveness of the boards that you're on?
I think everybody is struggling to try to connect, right? And try to find some good avenues to move the ball and be successful in the initiatives that each one of the associations have set out to do. Certainly, there's a lot of conversations in terms of how we're going to best do that. We've certainly done a lot of Zoom calls, team calls, correspondence that way. But I do think that people are looking for ways to connect in person. And so hopefully we can do that in a safe manner here in the near future. But each board has kind of really different thoughts, and different ideas. Some boards are very active, and they have a lot of participation at the board level to get things done, to move the ball, as I said earlier. And then some of them rely on some staffing, and it really kind of depends on the association and how they're set up and how they're built, whether things are going to get done by staff and continue to move the priorities, or whether they really need to lean on board members during this difficult time to really be effective. So it kind of depends, and I don't mean to be kind of clouded in my answer here, but it kind of depends on how the makeup and the genetics are of that organization. How do they traditionally get things done? And however that traditional way was, they're probably having to lean in a little harder now. So if it was a staff-driven organization, they're probably leaning hard on staff to move things along. If it was a board-driven type of association, then they're really trying to find ways to engage those board members at a different level and in a different way to continue.
What about? I mean, that makes a lot of sense, actually, Sean. And what you're saying there, I mean, I've seen a lot of that in a UK context. I mean, Steve, you and I have done a lot of work together in the governance field. I know an awful lot about the strengths of both your board and your executive. I mean, what's the kind of dynamic been in a TOPRA context in the last 9 months? Does what Sean say? Does that reflect on your own experience within TOPRA?
TOPRA has had an incredible past 12 months. Not the 12 months we planned. We've only not delivered one out of all the many courses and things that we intended to deliver in this past year. And our annual symposium, which is our big fundraising event, again, that was done online. It broke even and much more than that, which was quite an incredible achievement. And that was largely to the foresight of our chief executive, who's relatively new in post, and saw what was coming and made sure that the IT was there and ready. So when it came, we went for it. The board had the fortune to meet once physically at our headquarters in January. We meet 6 times a year, so the next 5 meetings were all done by electronic means. We've had successful board meetings. We've made decisions, which is the job of the board. And TOPRA, in fact, is on course to have a better year financially than we budgeted for this time last year, when we had no idea that this was coming. So we've done a lot of things, and we've clearly done them right. And I would say it was not by chance. Largely, it's been down to our chief executive, and equally, it's been down to the supervision that's come from our board. We were fortunate last year; we'd completely refreshed our strategy, not in a going off in a wholly new direction, but just making sure that we were sort of fit for purpose moving forward, and we've continued with that. And we've also, as coming out of our strategy, this year was about getting our governance plan in place. So we were reviewing our entire governance arrangements, and we've come up with a work plan that we will be implementing over the next at least 2 years. But in order to do that, we actually had to train our board members, particularly for people who were new to the board, on what governance was all about, what it meant for them, and to essentially equip them so that they understood what. Well, we did that successfully. I guess it won't be any surprise to you all that Andrew was our facilitator and trainer and delivered 4 online sessions. We had intended for it to be a one day workshop. We delivered 4 online sessions. Andrew got our board members up the curve, thinking appropriately. We identified all the actions. We committed to a governance development plan. We've got task finish groups assigned to each of the actions, and we will be progressing that over the next year. So I think we've had a year of success, but we're not complacent, and we are taking the next step in the challenge to make sure that we're ready, because inevitably there are going to be other challenges on the bumpy road ahead.
I think what I'm hearing from all 3 of you is that, well, what I hear from all 3 of you is actually what I think I spend, and I know Elisa spends a lot of time preaching, which is you need to have your structures in place, and you absolutely need to have clearly defined roles and responsibilities. Now, what I'm hearing at Topra, which is what I knew would be happening anyway, because they're a good team. They recognise their role. The board and the senior exec are 2 sides of the same leadership coin. But what has the staff done to bring the board into the decision making process, etc., etc. Particularly during this this time of crises? Is it fair of me to say it is not the responsibility of the staff to be needing to bring the board into those discussions? Shouldn't the board just know that that's his job, is to sort of come in at these moments of crisis and supervise and contribute at strategic conversations? Somebody said it. You're all looking at me now like he's just making this up. But when you listen back to this recording, whichever one of you it was, right?
Well, irrespective of when it was said, as a staff member, I've always been one to, I'll admit it, I've been a board handholder. I lay the breadcrumbs and I bring them along, and I'm very gentle. And I think what you're saying is the opposite. And I don't know if I agree, but as staff, I've always thought it was our responsibility to set the board members up to succeed. And whether that was onboarding, that was training, that was the clarification of roles and responsibilities.
Yep.
I don't think it's fair to put it on them. They're volunteers. They're experts and professionals in another area.
Yep.
And I think I wholly disagree with this concept that you've brought out of nowhere that was never mentioned before.
Right. Okay. Steve, I see you've got your hand up. Go on, Steve. What are you going to say? And then we'll come to you, Chris.
Well, one of the things that we learned, and learnt the way as in we were told it and we took it on board, was the noses in and fingers out. So our board takes a keen interest in the running of the organisation. We've become much more strategic, and we've left the running in the hands of our chief executive, who has led the staff team according to the objectives that we of the board have set. We have also then made decisions and continue to make decisions on things that are appropriately brought to us. But equally, we have trust in the organisation to get on and do things. Now, that does mean that Kevin and our chief executive are probably having a lot more meetings over and telephone calls over this year in order to make that happen. It's sort of happened seamlessly as far as the other board members concerned, but equally we've kept the communication. I've been there as a sounding board and equally to give direction, but not to overstep the mark and get the balance right. Now, some of our board members, the learning curve that Andrew took them up was to recognise we're not the committee at the local cricket club thinking about making the teas. We employ staff that worry about that sort of thing for us. Ours is to make the big decisions when they need to be with the information put in front of us, and equally we don't interfere in the day-to-day running of the organisation. We can help and advise and everything else like that, but essentially it goes through the funnel of a board discussion and the chief executive takes it back into the organisation for implementation, and vice versa. And we don't interfere with the line there. And that again was a very useful part of the training, as board members understand that their role and very important contribution is, but equally to allow our staff, particularly when we're all volunteers, that we motivate or ensure that our staff are motivated and get on and deliver for the organisation, which I have to say, and I'm very, very proud of this, the top staff clearly have done.
The board is there and ready to act, but if we don't bring any action items, we don't bring any information to the board cannot act. And I think there's a fine line to walk between being a staff-driven organization, especially in these times where we're not having in-person meetings, not having those face-to-face discussions, and having to go fully virtual. A staff-driven organization may not necessarily be bringing that information to the board to act on. And the board, they've got day jobs. Yeah, I know working with Sean, Sean's got a pretty important day job that he gets paid for, and we do not pay him. So if I'm Sean, if I'm Steve, I'm probably going to go with the time commitment to what I'm being paid for. So it's incumbent upon us to bring that information and set those meetings up and make sure that the board is engaged as staff. But Andrew, I do agree with you. The board should be ready to act when staff comes to them and sets up those meetings and says, okay, here's our agenda, here's our action items. We prepare them for that to give us the strategic direction. And then the staff acts on the day-to-day.
And to add on that, and I agree, Chris, again, that goes back to my first point. If you have a staff-driven association, what they may be doing is coming up with recommendations to bring to the board and say, here's plan A, B, or C. Let's talk about them. Let's debate them, and then let's ultimately decide what we want to do. There's other associations where they come to the board and say, okay, here's the problem. What do you want us to go do? And so one size doesn't fit all is what I'm getting at. And you have to understand the dynamic of the group that you're joining. And I also think a key point in this, and going back to what Andrew has said in terms of, hey, we're going to take this information back to the staff, and we're going to work with the executive director to get things done and to really execute the plan that the board has laid out. I think it is incumbent upon the board member to really understand and get to know the executive director, the one that is in charge of the staff, right? The one that is going to go execute the plan. And so get to know his or her tendencies, their personality. How is that going to reflect on what you're communicating? I think is extremely important. I've had really strong executive directors, and I've had less strong executive directors, to where you have to really, as a board, stand on some lines and say, this is what we want done. So it's not enough just to say, hey, here's the plan and leave. There's got to be some checks and balances and some accountability back and forth.
I don't disagree with anything that anybody said. And I think my point at the very start of this section, when I made the point about, is it our responsibility as staff to be leading the board through what they need and what we need from them. I think, you've all said it. We absolutely need to give them an onboarding process. What I saw back in March was those organizations who had ordinarily invested in the onboarding of their directors, of the development of their directors, they navigated that turbulence. And I think what we saw exposed at the governance level was those organizations that failed to invest really in the professional development of the directors, really struggled with it. And I don't hold truck with the volunteering piece at all. I think once you volunteered, you're in or you're not in, and therefore you're out. I'm totally on board with the, let's acknowledge the commitment that volunteers are giving the organization. But once they've volunteered, I don't care. You're either in or you're not. And I have a big beef with that when I hear people say, but we have to concede, we have to let we have to give them space. And it's like, no, because they're the ones who are legally responsible for the success of the organization. And go on, Steve, go on. Before get me off my soapbox, go on. You could see me, I'm just going for it. I was like, my God.
Please, Steve. Please.
It was a bit of an eye-opener for some of our directors, because they are the directors of the limited company and therefore have the fiduciary responsibilities. They are elected because of their preeminence in the field of regulatory affairs and their prominence just being well known. So they're not actually elected for their qualities that they bring to the board. It's everything else, and it's their very high professional standing within our profession. And we recognize that we need to get them up the curve quickly so that they understand, because as directors, we're running a business. We're not for profit, but we're, as Andrew kept, not there money either, because we wouldn't be doing justice to sort of founding principles. So we see the investment as being necessary to equip our volunteers, and yes, they are volunteers. But I subscribe to Andrew's view. Once you're on the board, you need to deliver and work as a director, and that does mean reading the papers. It does mean being involved in making decisions. The training is important because not everybody comes equipped, but we need to quickly equip them so that they can do and fulfill the members have asked them to do.
Chris.
Yeah, a couple points here, and one of them may be controversial, and I'll piggyback on what Steve just said here. The time to train and to develop board members isn't when they get to sit on the board. The time to train and prepare them is when they're in other volunteer leader positions on committees or as committee chairs. Because what this pandemic has exposed in many associations is that lack of preparation to get to this point, because many of us have gone through a board cycle where we've added board members, and we've been fortunate enough that we've been doing that. We've been preparing our future leaders. But I know of a number of associations that didn't invest in that. And so what the second point of this is, I don't think we're going to see a real impact on board structure and board governance until a year or two down the road. And I think the first place we'll see it is with, if any association's got chapters. Because chapters, this is much more close-knit, much more familial than I think a national association, simply from a location geographic standpoint. But I think that the critical miss here for them is going to be not having the opportunity to train those future leaders as they move into roles. And as a national trade association, what we look to our chapters for leaders. And if that pipeline has dried up over the past 9 months, and for however long this goes, that's going to have a trickle-down effect over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And that's where I think we're going to see this impact.
We want to actually have a training program that all aspiring board members, or indeed anybody, because a lot of our members are self-employed consultants, anybody who wishes to be a director of a limited company, we train them and equip them with the understanding so that they have some credentials when they put themselves forward for election. It's almost like a badge that they can wear as part of their putting themselves forward. So absolutely subscribe to the point of training people in readiness rather than just once they've made it onto the board.
And I think there's a soft skills component to this, that between fiduciary and bylaws and governance, the humanity of it gets lost, and the ability to listen, the ability to read the room, the relationship investments that are necessary between the board and the staff. I think there's a serious soft skills piece that's missing in board onboarding and training that I know I want to speak up on behalf of. And my fear is that as we're all online, that those soft skill pieces get harder and harder and get farther and farther kind of lost.
Well, we talked about, some of the, horror stories that can happen on a board, and, I've got my own, and probably everybody does, but, it speaks to those soft skills, right? And it speaks to the trust that you need to have in a boardroom, and the politics that can happen in a boardroom, and the divisions that can happen that are just natural. And I've been in a number of meetings, and I've been with Elisa enough to know that when she starts a meeting, she says, all right, take off your company hat, take off your personal bias. We're here for the industry. We're here as a joint group, trying to move an objective forward. And it really is important to do that and set that framework. And part of it is also knowing your own personality, right? And how you interact with people. I'm a hard charger. I go fast and I go hard. And as a result, sometimes in my leadership style, I can run ahead of everybody else and look backwards and nobody's with me, right? And that's shown up. And so trying to get volunteers to come along with you, and you haven't spent enough time communicating and coalescing around a general idea and getting consensus, then you can often look and say, I haven't done my job as a board director in moving things forward. So it's not only knowing the dynamics of the team, it's also being honest and being reflective of yourself and say, hey, this is how I show up in a room, and I need to guard myself between some of the things that I don't do well. And how can I build trust with my teammates in this type of situation?
So, we talk about those horror stories, and I think we've all had lessons learned. If we were to create the ideal, and, I'll be honest, Andrew and I are trying to create the ideal, and developing a board leadership program that can empower and prepare and set these board leaders up to be the crisis managers and change leaders that we need them to be now more than ever. What does that look like? Is that something that is just based on fiduciary and governance? I mean, it sounds like it needs to have a magical balance of governance, fiduciary, standard leadership, and all the soft skills, and it might be a work in progress.
And I think that's important. I think the governance naturally is important, and we're going to speak to that. And we have spoke about and making sure we're doing the right things to educate folks before they come and participate in the board. But I see the main mistakes or the main issues that hamper boards is those soft skills, those inabilities to take off your hat. I sit on a board at AWCI where part of us are union signatory contractors, part of us are non-union. And we have very strong ideals on both sides of the fence. And when we walk in that room, we have to let that guard down, right? We have to move the whole industry together. And so that is a challenge that we put those biases behind, and we say, hey, we're better than that. We need to move together, and we need to ask good questions. And this sounds silly at times, but you need to remind people that the meeting has to happen in the meeting. It doesn't happen at the bar the night before or the dinner afterwards or in the hallways. The meeting happens in the meeting. And that's where I've seen a lot of things get derailed, is because, again, people leave the meeting and these 2 or 3 people come over here and they have a conversation, and we're not, again, getting consensus with the group. We're creating these silos of different ideas, and we're not coming together.
Yeah, that right there, Sean, is the fiduciary duty of obedience encompassed right there, because it's if a decision is made by the board, there's no walking out of that room and saying, well, I don't agree with this. I think this is bad. It's the board made a decision. And I tell volunteer leaders this all the time. I told them this when I was with the home builders years and years ago. The first lesson is you do not represent your company on this board. Every decision you make is based off of one question. Is this good for the association and the industry? Not for my company, but for the association and the industry.
Which is a challenge, which is a big challenge for people to take those hats off. And I do have empathy for them when they first walk in the door. But I certainly I've sat, thankfully not. I stress not thankfully around the top of the table, far from it. But I have sat around other board tables and been surprised at everybody's seeming inability to recognize their primary function and their primary responsibility once in that room is to the organization, to the association, both in legal terms and in moral and ethical terms. Go on, Steve. You're going to say, no, Andrew, you're wrong. Actually,
No. I'm going to reinforce this. What I want to highlight is the transformation that I've tried to lead this year to our board being more strategic and about making and taking decisions rather than problem solving in the room, because we are working towards that in as much as once the board's made a decision, we all own it collectively, we support it, and we seek that through the organisation. Whether we voted for it or not, I'm happy to say that in the main, overwhelming majority of our decisions are actually made by unanimity. So that's a good place to be. But we've focused on having proposals, worked up proposals in the form of a detailed paper coming up jointly from board members and or staff, saying what the situation is, what the target is in order to either remedy or address or make the most of an opportunity, and what the proposal is. And maybe a bit of stakeholder management behind the scenes prior to the meeting to make sure that everybody's engaged. And this is a technique that I learned when I worked in the public sector, worked in government organisations, so that when you come to the board meeting, there's a full and frank and open discussion about the proposal that is in front of the board. It may get modified in the light of member contributions and things like that, but essentially the board then either adopts that or asks for further work to do. If it's adopted, it's then with the chief executive, whoever, to go away and implement, and for the board to stand behind. And that's the transformation, because previously, when I first joined the board, it was more at the end of the spectrum where there was we've got a bit of a problem here and we need to, get our heads together and see if we can work up a solution. I'm not saying that was wrong, but those solutions may have been suboptimal because they were put together actively in the room at that time. So that's a transition that we've tried to make, and I would argue successfully made, but one I would like to see the topper of the future maintain.
I think what's I'm conscious of time. Sorry, I'm looking at my watch as we're talking, and I'm conscious of time. But what's clearly coming through this afternoon, and it's music to my ears, is that there's certainly from both. Or from those of you who sit on the board, I really, I always walk in the board and say, look, if you're not compliant, you've got bigger problems than your relationships. If you're breaking the law, you've got bigger headaches than this to be worried about. But what, for me, the key takeaway today, I love the point, actually, Sean, you were making about, self-awareness. I think we're very good at talking about how others are behaving, but actually to understand how we behave and how we see the world and how we are feeling and managing our own emotions, I think, is absolutely critical. Because at the end of the day, you can write the best governance structures and frameworks and policies known to man, but the reality is governance is just about people. And people always come with baggage, different experiences, different backgrounds, politics, different views of the world, different opinions, and always, without fail, when I parachuted into a board that is failing, it's always because of personal conflict driven by poor communications. People can always navigate around obstacles when they're not sure what to do, but they can do it together. But if it's what you described, Elisa, as the soft skills area, if it's about relationships and it's personal, then you're on to hiding to nothing.
But I don't want boards to be scared. I mean, those things can be taught. If every board was Steve and a Sean, they would be high performing. But just because you don't have a Steve or a Sean on your board doesn't mean that you can't train and invest and help your board members in those areas, not only for the benefit of the board, but the benefit of their own businesses, the benefit of their own professions. So there's hope. There's paths for improvement.
And do you know, Elisa, anybody who may have developed a leadership development program for directors of associations? I don't know. Maybe you know somebody who's done that.
It's so interesting that you mentioned that. I have heard speak of a pretty impressive program. It's called Impact. Oh. It's an international network of board leaders and the training that helps prepare them for crisis, for change, for leadership, for governance. And, maybe something that some of these boards want to look into. But what I love the point Chris made was about by the time you've gotten to the office role at the board, it may even be too late. I wonder if impact may even need to be expanded as introductory, lead-in for those chapters or for those who are committee chairs in preparation. We may need to help develop the spring training and the AAA team for board leaders in preparation for their advancement.
To put in the British parlance, that would be the championship in the first division.
Thank you for that.
I'll add one more thing, because it's real quick on this one, because we've all touched on it. But from a staff perspective, I should be sitting in a board meeting and certainly paying attention to what's happening. No offense to that, what's going on there, but I should be looking for board members and identifying board members who they're quiet. They're disinterested. Is that a disinterest because they're just simply not engaged, or is it they're too scared to speak up? Because especially in our industry, our industry is built to type A personalities, and all of our board members need to have an equal seat at that table. And if I can identify those board members, if they may not feel comfortable speaking up, it's my role as a staff person to help get them to the point where they're comfortable at that next board meeting to speaking their mind, because a representative board represents the entire industry. It's not 4 or 5 personalities driving the discussion.
Well, and especially in a trade association space where those around the table are actually competitors in their professional market. It adds a nuance that I think makes the soft skills and makes this type of onboarding and the understanding of roles and responsibilities that much more important.
We hope you've enjoyed today's conversation, and if there's a subject you'd like us to explore, or if you'd like to join us on the Association Transformation podcast, visit us at associationtransformation.org, and you can send us your ideas. Until then, you can find Association Transformation wherever you get your podcasts, and we hope you'll add us to your favorites list. Until next time, stay well and put your members and your mission first.
Innovate, membership, partnership, agility, communicate, trust. That's Impact, a 12-week intensive syllabus for innovative, industrious, and inspiring association board leaders. Visit associationtransformation.org for more details and to register for our next program. Cohorts commence in February, May, and September 2021. Impact, a signature program delivered in partnership by Consult Strategy and Brewer Pratt Solutions.